Hi guys, Rony here and welcome to the workshop. Today we are bringing you a bit of a classic video where I'm going to talk you through my experiences with my latest road bike in the past year or so of riding, as this bike just turned 1 year old. And it's a bit different than what I've been using before. I've changed a couple of parts throughout the year just to try different things, and it turned out to be a pretty great one. Possibly the best bike that I've had so far. I think a lot of people like to debate whether bikes have actually progressed in the last couple of years. Well, for me and my experiences, I can say that they did definitely, because now we have bikes that are aerodynamic, have disc brakes, great shifting, 12-speed wireless, good handling, ride compliance, nice wide tires, everything into an aerodynamic and lightweight package, just like this one. So from that standpoint, I think this is definitely a bit of a greatest hits kind of bikes for me. So the frame, as you know, is a factor Ostro VAM in this Soho edition colorway, which is not very typical, but I kind of got used to it. Obviously, one downside is that because it's a pretty detailed paint job with lots of colors, it will add a bit of weight compared to a gloss carbon finish. But at least it's a bit unique and people definitely seem to like it. And I like it too, to be honest. It's as I said, it's a bit of a look catcher, or yeah, definitely not your standard black bike. I've talked about it, the properties and how it rides in previous videos, so just to sum this up real quickly. So it's a all-out race bike basically, so it definitely rides like that. It's stiff and responsive, but I have to be honest, most bikes nowadays are and fulfill these criteria, but where it differs, I think, first of all, is the ride quality. So it has a really kind of a supple feel to it. It's good over rough roads. You get nice grip in rough top descents and on bad tarmac surfaces. And even if you venture slightly off pavement, it's still pretty compliant. So overall, I think that's a big plus for a bike like this. Geometry wise, it's not aggressive as the tarmac, so the reach is slightly shorter if I remember correctly, and the stack is definitely a bit taller, which for me is not ideal, to be honest, but I got around that using a special cockpit. But for 99% of the population, or even perhaps more than that, this will certainly not be an issue. So performance wise, definitely up there. It's also pretty light, considering it's an aero frame. It has nice big tire clearances throughout, although if I may point out one thing, this winter I wanted to fit the Corrado Road Racer Mark III mudguards to it, which I was using last year on my winter bike, but with these tall Michelin tires they don't really fit. So while the clearance is very good, all things considered, if you go towards this a bit of an extreme setup, winter setup, then yeah, it's not as huge as you might expect, and these mudguards just didn't fit. Perhaps they would with some smaller tires, or at least ones that are the same width but have a lower height, which arguably are most tires, but yeah, in this particular example it didn't work. One big improvement that this frame does have, or particularly the fork does have, compared to my previous bikes, is that no matter how much I try to twist the front end, I don't get any brake rub, which with the Venge was a very common occurrence, and with tarmac it wasn't quite as common, but it still did happen occasionally. Another cool feature that is now showing its qualities with 1 year of riding is that it has a solid lube technology headset bearings, so they didn't really need any servicing at all. And as you can see from the condition that it is in right now, the bike has seen some bad weather, and yeah, I just didn't need to do anything about that, so I'm very happy with it. particularly considering that the front end itself, it's fully integrated, not so easy to work on. Particularly now with this cockpit that it's one piece and everything is routed inside, yeah, it would be a bit of a headache, but using these bearings, that just cancels that out. One thing that Factor have changed regarding this frame set and fork is the fork and the compression plug design. And I know this because recently I've put together some bikes for customers from the same frame set that now use a different design. So this one uses a D-shaped steerer with kind of an aluminum insert that goes on the front of it, and that's how you clamp the whole stem together. The newer design uses a fork that's molded into that shape, so there's no separate aluminum insert, which I think is an improvement. And also the new version has the compression plug built in and a thread for it. So yeah, that's a bit of a simplification, but this old design still works pretty well. Because my stack is quite low, I had to cut off this aluminum insert, which wasn't that easy. Speaking of the cockpit, a lot of people are asking about the absence of the standard black ink cockpit that comes with this bike normally. I've never actually got to use that because of issues with availability. So at first the original cockpit wasn't available in the size that I would have preferred. That was 1 year ago. And because of that, I opted to go for a different setup with a tarmac stem and an MV handlebar. And honestly, that worked pretty great because it matched my previous setups. So I was happy with that. I had to go up in stem length because of the aforementioned changes in geometry between two frame sets that I've been riding. And towards the middle of the year, I started looking at the Speco integrated bars. And since my MV handlebars were 35 centimeters center to center at the tops, I wanted to try something even narrower. And since there aren't many aftermarket options available, I decided to go in a full custom setup. So yeah, here it is. Basically, this was the very first set the Speco have manufactured. It did require some work and some time to be put in there. We've also created a special one-piece spacer around here to nicely blend in the cockpit for an aero fit. So it turned out to be pretty great. I got tons of questions regarding the measurements of this unit. So the center to center on this bar is 32 centimeters at the tops and 38 centimeters across the drops. There's a slight problem with that now with the new UCI rules, because there you have a minimum width of 35 centimeters, but that's edge to edge. So this bar actually does comply, but it's really cutting it close. So if you measure it right here at the rubber hoods, then it fits. So yeah, I would have preferred a couple millimeters extra just to be on the safe side, but we didn't know this rule is going to be present in the future, so it is what it is. However, the rest of the bar works out great. Another thing you can notice about this is that actually the stem section is really rather short, and if you look at the bar itself, this part is actually quite a bit longer than you would get normally. The total reach is actually 210 mil, so that equates to my old setup of the 140 mil tarmac stem and the compact MV SES bar. So yeah, it really is a long cockpit, although it doesn't seem like that. The reason why I've done it this way is because the UCI banned the ABB cockpit from Speco, which had the integrated forearm support. So this kind of does that while not being so obvious. So yeah, it's allowed, so we did it this way. Another thing I've added later on and I've changed over the course of the year is the group set. I've talked about this in great detail in a separate video, so you'll link this down below. But again, just to give you a quick summary, this is a 12-speed race, latest and greatest. It's not a complete revolution, but it has some nice novelties which I really do appreciate. So that is the hood shape, the brakes, also the shifting, and not really the range, but you have the same range with smaller steps, so that's always nice. Also the new sprint shifters are a lot nicer than before, so I'm happy that I went for this change. It also simplifies the cockpit quite a bit because the levers are now wireless, so that's another good thing. What I didn't change is the wheel set, so this still is the Head Vanquish RC6 Pro that I've been riding. Well, this is the third year now that I'm on this wheel set, and it's just, well, it's bomb-proof really, apart from being fast and very stable in the winds. The hubs are holding up great, the bearings as well, so really no complaints in that regard. One slight issue that I have with the frame set itself, it's a really minor thing, but if you have to nitpick, then it's this one. So the axles are actually machined in a way that there is no step for the Allen key to slot into. So if you want to grab the axle with the Allen key in, like I usually do, because it's quick and easy to do, but you can't really do that because there's no step to prevent the Allen key from going fully in. So yeah, that makes it a bit finicky. And there's one more thing with the rear of the bike. Előre tolhatom? That makes wheel changes slightly difficult and annoying is when you take out the axle and the wheel, the derailleur hanger actually rotates downward a little bit. So if you were to reinstall the wheel, you have to hold up the rear mac hanger with one hand, because otherwise you won't be able to engage the threads, which again is not very common, and it's not a big deal. It's slightly annoying, but I just thought it would be worth mentioning. One more thing that plagues these factor frame sets, and other ones too, unfortunately, is the seat post binder. I did get some initial seat post slip with this frame, but in my case at least, it was a very simple fix. I just put some grip tape on the internal face of the binder where it contacts the seat post, and it was problem free ever since. So yeah, definitely happy with that. If I'm talking about the seat posts, I have to mention the saddle as well. This is the Fabric Align S Pro saddle. I've also talked about this in previous videos, and it has become the best-selling saddle in my store, at least, because it's just well priced, pretty light, and extremely comfortable for a variety of riders. So I've had it on the bike ever since I first put it on there, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I've have it on other two bikes as well, except the time trial bike. So nice one to have. Another addition from Factor are the black ink bottle cages, and well, they just do the job, to be honest. They're nothing outstanding in terms of design or weight, but they're just sturdy and hold the bottles well, no rattling or any problems, so I'm really happy with those. They look pretty cool as well. If you go further down the drivetrain, this was a bit of a problematic bit if you talk about the bottom bracket. Previously I was using Quark power meters with the new style dub spindle, and this is a great design because you do have a standard size bearing, which is then reduced by a plastic or aluminum sleeve to a diameter of 29 mm. So you have that interface to take up the slack between the spindle and the bearing. These are 30mm axles that I'm using now, and the disadvantage of these is that the spindle has to go straight into the inner race of the bearing, which can lead to some problems because the tolerances vary quite a lot. So at first I did get quite a lot of creaking and snapping from the bottom bracket, and eventually what I did, and I did this on all three of my factor bikes, is that I've applied Loctite retaining compound between the spindle and the bearing to keep it nice and secure, and this basically eliminates all the movement and play in that interface, and it has been problem free ever since. The downside, of course, is that because it's basically a bonded joint now between the two, it takes quite a lot of force, or a combination of heat and force, to disassemble, but I also came around with a technique to do that, so no big deal there whatsoever. Where I did have quite a big problem, and I posted this on my shorts videos earlier on, were with the rotor Aldo carbon cranks. Now, I started out the build with these exact cranks, so these are the Aldo 30 aluminum ones, and then I got some negative comments about that, so I decided to change to carbon, and arguably those are a fair bit lighter, but they're also a fair bit less sturdy, and because of the bonded thread insert in the carbon arm and then the layers of carbon on top of that, it creates quite a few issues with my stance. So I like to ride a very narrow Q factor, and because of this recessed pedal thread, those extra millimeters of clearance created for, or the lack of it, created for a lot of rubbing on the arms and my shoes. So for that I had to go back to the standard wide steel spindles on my Wahoo aero pedals. So that was one problem, and then the other problem, the big one, came around when I started to get a weird clicking noise again from the bottom racket, and it took me quite a while to find the source. And the source, as I've described in that video, was the fact that the bonded insert that connects the arm to the spindle, there's this self-extracting nut portion, and that's a piece of aluminum bonded into the carbon, and that joint just failed completely. So there was a rocking rotational movement between the two parts, which rendered the cranks useless. I sent them back to Rotor. I got a replacement or a refund, more or less, and then I went back to aluminum, and these don't have the Q factor issue, and hopefully they shouldn't have, well, there's no way for them to have the bonding issue because none of this is bonded. It's a one-piece part, so much more sturdy, and it's also much more resistant compared to the carbon ones. Also the finish is very durable. It's a hard anodized coating, so yeah, I'll just be sticking to these, and I have these on all three bikes, so yeah, happier that way. Another problematic bit arguably have been the Wahoo pedals. So these have now the infamous side-to-side lateral play issue. I went through 3 different pairs until they got good, but they were exchanged very quickly and very promptly, so excellent job from the Wahoo customer service. And finally I got a set that now has the newer design, and it has been problem-free ever since. Performance-wise, the pedals actually do have a crisper engagement and a nicer feel compared to the old speed play versions, and apart from this, because of the surround steel insert, they're also much more durable, and the new cleats are much nicer too. So yeah, it took a couple of tries to get them right, but thankfully they did now. I got some questions regarding chain drops, because particularly in the World Tour there have been certain cases of riders dropping their chains on the new 12-speed crank sets. I'm using the 12-speed group set, but with the old 11-speed chain rings, and honestly I never had any issues, so I'm thankful for that. I do have a KA chain catcher as a peace of mind, but not really necessary at this point. As I said, I was using quark power meters before. Now for that we changed to power to max. This is the NG SL version, so the one with the integrated battery. And to be honest, I can't really tell you a lot about it. And if you think about the power meter, I believe that's a good thing, because it hasn't done anything wrong to this point. I like the fact that it has an internal battery. I just think that it's a more reliable setup. It's completely waterproof this way, because you charge it via magnetic port, and yeah, trouble-free. The measurements are correct. Nothing I really came across, so happy days with that. One addition I do have with the 12-speed Dura-Ace group set is the SLF Motion oversized pulley wheel cage. This is the aero version of that, and I like the SLF models compared to the others because they use a solid carbon fiber plates, so they're just really robust. And the added benefit, as I've figured out later on, is that because the pulley wheels are essentially completely shielded from the elements, they don't require as much servicing if you ride in poor weather. So now during the winter, that's a nice addition, although they're not really suitable for off-road riding because they would pack with mud easily, I guess, in bad conditions. Regarding the durability of the group set itself, I'm nearing the end of life for the first chain after, I would say, around 8,000 kilometers on the chain itself, so that's a pretty good performance considering the conditions that I ride in usually, particularly during the winter, so that's a plus. So no degradation there. And the final thing I want to talk about are the tires. Now, I've started out the year riding S-Works Turbo Cotton 28mm tires with latex tubes, so this was my go-to setup from the year before, and they work, well, just fine. But then the new generation of tubeless tires came along, so first I tried the Conti GP 5000 STR in various widths, and in my experience that is pretty much the go-to tire right now. I was racing and training on that quite a lot. It has good grip, it has good sealing properties, it's fast, and yeah, it has all the features you'd want from a premium road race tire, and it's definitely go-to. But because of supply shortages, I wasn't really able to get the tire in the quantities I wanted. So then I started experimenting with others, and from that selection came the choice of the relatively freshly released Michelin Power Cups. And Michelin usually isn't the first choice when it comes to road bike tires, but they really upped their game in the last few years. And firstly, I was on the Power TT, which is an excellent time trial tire, tubed though, not a regular clincher, not a tubeless one. And then I tried the Power Cup, and I was actually quite impressed because in terms of rolling resistance, it's up there with the Conti, and it matches it everywhere else, and it's just more widely available. So that's what I've been riding so far, and also throughout the winter. There are a few cuts showing now, and the thread on the back tire is starting to get flat, but I never really had any punctures or issues. One thing I've discovered though is that they do require quite a bit of sealant because they're pretty porous, but yeah, that's just an initial setup thing. And finally, I also have the Tubulite tire inserts in there just for added security, which is pretty handy when it comes to racing and changing bikes instead of, well, just wheels and fixing punctures. So I'm really happy with that feature too. So yeah, I think that concludes all of the parts and slight issues, annoyances and performances of this bike. I hope you have found this informational and useful. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to tune into the channel later on and subscribe. And if you want even more than that, then perhaps consider joining our pro cycling community to get even more in-depth information about my bikes and setups. That's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.